Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Gaura Hari Bol. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Prabhupada. Jai Nitai Gaura Premanande. Om Gyan Timirandhasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Swami Namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya eva cha patitanam bhavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, everyone. So this morning we're continuing on looking at all the different excuses that people may offer as to why they can't read the Bhagavad Gita or practice spiritual life or take Krishna consciousness seriously. And we're going to look at all the different answers that Krishna gives. So just a very quick recap. What is the excuse that Krishna answers in the first chapter of the Gita? Yes. No time. Someone may say, I just don't have any time for spiritual life. But no, you cannot make that excuse because no one could be more busy than Arjun. And despite how busy Arjun was, how intense his situation was, he said, Senayor Ubayor Madhye Ratam Stapaya Mechuta. Krishna, take my chariot to the middle so that I can deeply reflect about what I'm just about to do. So reflection, introspection, taking time to explore one's inner consciousness, one's inner life. This is time that you have to make. It's not whether you have time, you have to make time. What is the excuse that Krishna answers in the second chapter? Yes. I already know it, someone may say. I grew up with this. I've learned all about this. It's nothing new for me. But no, one cannot make that excuse because who could have known better than Arjun? Arjun had all dharma. He had all piety. He had the best instruction. He had the most elevated association from his birth. But he came in front of Krishna and said, Shishyasteham sadhimam tvam prapannam. I'm your disciple. I'm confused. I don't know. I think I know, but I don't know. And therefore, one who is humble, they can actually learn. In the third chapter, what is the excuse that Krishna answers? Yes. Yeah, I've got too many different duties. Arjun says, okay, I agree. I should practice spiritual life, but I have so many different dharmas to follow. And all of these dharmas, they distract me from the other dharma. And because I got so many duties to do in this world, I can't do my spiritual duty. But Krishna explains, Tasmad sarveshu kaleshu, at all times, ma manusmara, remember me, yudhyacha, and at the same time fight. In other words, dharmas, the different duties we have in life, don't necessarily need to be in conflict with each other. They can actually complement and support each other. So that's not a good excuse, Krishna says. Everything should work together, an integrated life. Chapter number 4, what is the excuse that Krishna answers? Yeah, I'm not intelligent enough. Chapter 4 is all about transcendental knowledge, but Krishna explains you don't need high intelligence to understand the Gita, material intelligence. But what do you need? What is the qualification? Bhakto sime sakha cheti rahasyam yetadu tamam. You can understand this rahasya, this confidential secret, if you are devoted and if you are friendly, free of envy. And in this way, Krishna, you can see, systematically is answering many, many different excuses. So now let's go to chapter number 5. And what does Krishna explain in chapter number 5? Krishna explains something amazing. He explains all about how to bring about peace in the world. And he explains that peace in the world doesn't come by a material arrangement, but peace in the world will come by a change of vision. So sometimes people say, I don't want to practice spiritual life. I don't think this is important. I don't think the Bhagavad Gita, reading this is priority, because we have to do something practically to help the world. What are you guys doing? You're just sitting down reading. You're just singing. You're just dancing on the street. You're just worshipping. You're pouring all these milk and honey and all of this over a statue. How is any of this going to help the world? Why do you spend so much time, energy, effort practicing all this spiritual life? Don't you know there's a world that is suffering out there? Don't you know we're in the middle of a pandemic? Don't you know that there are wars going on in the world? Don't you think that you should do something to practically help the world rather than just praying? What is that going to do to really improve the world? But this is not a very good excuse, because what Krishna explains in the 5th chapter is that all the problems that we see in the world, if you trace them back to their root cause, all of the problems in the world are due to a lack of spiritual vision. What does Krishna say to Arjuna in the 5th chapter? Vidya vinaya shampane brahmane gavihastini sunichaiva svapakecha pandita samadarshina. Krishna says, if you have vidya, if you have knowledge, then the second thing that will happen is you'll become vinaya. You'll become very humble and gentle. When you have knowledge and you're humble and gentle, then the third thing that happens is you become a pandita, a very, very learned person. And when you become a learned person, what happens? Samadarshina, your darshan, your vision of life changes. Why does your vision of life change? Because you don't just see externals, you see internals. You see whether this is a cow, whether this is a dog, whether this is a brahmana, whether this is a so-called low-caste person. Actually, within every living being, there's a soul. And because there's a soul within all living beings, all life should be respected. Not just living beings should be respected, but nature should be respected. Not just nature should be respected, but all animals, all people's rights should be respected. In other words, if we really want peace in the world, then it means we have to change our vision. So what's the best way to help the world? If someone says, I want to do something to practically help the world, well, the best thing you can do is develop spiritual vision. You see, once I used to study at UCL, and at this time there was the war going on in the Middle East. And I was walking through the canteen, and someone came to me as part of the Stop the War coalition. And he gave me a leaflet and he said, thousands of people are dying. We have to stop the war. So I looked at him and I said, what happens when we die? So, not normally anyone asks you that question. So he was a little confused. I said, what happens when we die? He says, when we die, well, the body just goes back into the earth. I said, so you're saying we're just chemicals? He said, yeah, we're just chemicals and we go back into the earth. So then I said to him, so then why are you worrying? If everything's matter, nothing matters. I could pour a Coke can into the ocean, or I could throw you into the ocean, and it would be the same thing, because that's matter. No, he said, no, but we are more. Why are we more? Well, we can speak. Yeah, but ultimately you're just chemicals. So then I was mentioning to him that, no, he said, no, but we are something more than just chemicals. I said, yeah, so what more are we? I said, if you really want people to respect life, but you're simultaneously teaching them a philosophy that we're just chemicals, then how can you really expect people to really deeply respect life? We'll respect life when we understand life comes from the soul. And when we understand life comes from the soul, and the soul is within everything, then we'll have peace towards everyone and everything. Srila Prabhupada made a connection that most people would never make. He said, because you're killing animals, therefore there is war in the world. Now, most people would not make that connection, but Srila Prabhupada made that connection. Because he said, if you don't understand there is a soul within the animal, if you don't respect that life, then it's just one more step towards then committing violence towards others. So if we really want to help the world, we have to change our vision from material vision to spiritual vision. If people have material vision, they will try to exploit. If people have spiritual vision, they will try to serve. If people have material vision, they will always be focused on what they can take. But if people have spiritual vision, they will be very eager to look at how they can give. If people have material vision, their constant meditation will be selfishness. But if people have spiritual vision, their constant meditation will be selflessness. So you really want to make the world a better place? Then you have to change people's vision. So if someone says, I don't want to practice spiritual life because I want to do something practically to help the world, well, here Krishna is saying, if you really want to help the world, you got to change the way people see the world. You got to change people's darshan. Therefore, in this world, so many advancements, isn't it? That little girl, she wrote a poem called The Paradox of Our Times. We have taller buildings, but shorter tempers. We have wider highways, but narrower minds. We have more conveniences, but less time. We have more degrees, but less sense. We have more experts, but less solutions. We've multiplied our possessions, but reduced our values. So you really want to make the world a better place? Then you have to give people spiritual vision. You have to have spiritual values. And so in the 5th chapter, Krishna explains this is the real peace formula to actually give spiritual knowledge. Anyone want to ask anything on this? Or yeah. Yeah, spiritual vision doesn't just mean that we respect the spirit and neglect the material. Spiritual vision also means to see that behind the material energy is Krishna. So what does Krishna say in the Bhagavad Gita? Devi hi ashagunamayi mama maya duratyaya. This material energy is my divine energy. So even the material energy should be respected. Isn't it? One time Prabhupada was in a temple and he said, I am hearing, but you are not hearing. Devotees thought, what is Prabhupada? Maybe he's hearing Krishna's flute. Maybe he's hearing some divine message from Krishna. Maybe he's hearing the super soul within the heart. Prabhupada said, someone's left the tap on and is dripping and no one's doing anything about it. Why are you wasting Krishna's energy? In other words, when one has spiritual vision, then they have also great respect for the material energy. So devotees shouldn't waste anything. Just like this morning, I woke up and I was in the bathroom, and there's a poster there about how many liters of water you waste if you take like a 10-minute shower. So that's very nice, because devotees don't want to waste Krishna's energy. So actually, if people have spiritual vision, even on a material level, so many things would be better, isn't it? Makes sense. Yeah. Anything else anyone wants to ask on this? How spiritual knowledge actually makes the world a better place? How it actually practically helps the world? Yeah. 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 So what should we do when we see people suffering and we want to help them? But sometimes it seems like just giving them knowledge, but they have an immediate problem. Yeah. Therefore, in Krishna consciousness, we're not just going out and giving knowledge, we're also trying to give practical help, isn't it? Like we have Food for Life, and we have so many relief efforts. And now, even in the present world situation, the devotees are going out of their way to try to help others in a very practical way. So as devotees, we should also try to help people on all levels, on the level of the body, on the level of the mind, and ultimately on the level of the soul as well. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he actually said that when you see a poor person, you should give something. Actually, you should give something. Because if you don't give anything, then gradually you'll become very hard-hearted and you'll become very insensitive. So we should try to help people on a practical level, on a material level, but not just a practical level and a material level. Also, side by side, we should give them the real solution. Yeah. So both are important. Just like if you go to hospital, who is more important, the nurse, the nurses, or the doctor? Both are important, right? Because if you only have a doctor, but you have no nurses to look after you day to day, you may be dead by the time the doctor comes. And if you only have nurses, then you may survive day to day, but you may never get out of the hospital because the doctor doesn't come to give you the real operation to get out. So you need both. So spiritual knowledge is like the ultimate solution to get out. But then material help is like the day-to-day things that we have to help people with. So if someone comes and says, no, I'm hungry, it's okay. Here's a Gita. Just read it. Yeah, it's nice, but I need to eat something as well. Yeah, so we should try to provide both as far as possible. Yeah, Dr. Japur.
One of the themes of this lecture is people think because they believe something, they may believe, that it's good to be humble, and they think that that's enough, but they may not actually be humble. So one of the challenges is, how do we help people understand that they maybe they have spiritual vision, but they're not open to take feedback to find out that the way they're behaving doesn't align with what they believe.
Yeah. So how do we help people to see that in their own life? Yeah, that requires a relationship. You see, like people don't just hear with the head, they hear with the heart. So even though you may tell someone something that's completely true, if they don't feel a heartfelt connection with you, they won't be able to accept it. Therefore, they say people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So generally, as people giving feedback, we have to ask ourselves, have I sufficiently invested in a relationship with this person? Have I sufficiently given myself in a relationship to actually somewhat connect with them on a deeper level? then maybe I'll be more qualified and more able to get through to them. Because every one of us has an ego, which is, just part of being in the material world. And the only thing that can circumvent the ego, the false ego, is love at this point. And so I think we need to try to do that more. Try to conquer people. Srila Prabhupada could say very heavy things to people because he also, it was coming from a very deep place in his heart, and his love was so overflowing that he managed to overcome people's ego. Just like there was that Mr. Sethi in Mumbai, and he was a construction worker, and the devotees brought him to meet Prabhupada because he was the one who was building the whole Juhu temple, practically doing. So Prabhupada asked him, "What do you do in the morning? What's your?" He says, "I wake up about 9 o'clock." You can see this is heading for trouble. And then Prabhupada said, "And then what do you do?" And he says, "Yeah, well, sometimes I get up, sometimes I have breakfast in bed." Prabhupada said, "What is the difference between you and a pig?" And the devotees were like, no, he's one of the good guys. He's the one helping us. Therefore, oh my God, And Prabhupada looked at him with such compassion and love and said, "Don't waste your life. Don't waste your life. It's so valuable." He said, in that moment, I felt such deep compassion from Srila Prabhupada that my whole life people had just flattered me. People had just praised me. But here was someone who was telling me something, but for my own good, even though it was heavy. And he took it. So if we really want to give people feedback, the first thing is we have to have overflowing love within our heart and a genuine desire to help them. And we have to invest in a relationship with them. And then I think our feedback will have probably more power. Yeah, I don't know if you want to respond to that.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, thank you very much. About what you said from Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur on giving to people in need. And I'm wondering practically, yesterday when we're on Harinam, I see a lot of people on the streets. I can fold my hands to them and give them a smile, but I wonder if it was kind of an appropriate way to interact with people on the streets.
Yeah. I mean, one thing, of course, is prasadam. So many times on Harinam we do that. We carry prasadam with us so that, people are there, they feel, not only do they see the Harinam, they see everything, but then you give them some prasadam and they think, wow, they also practically helped me. And that's very good preaching. So we can always do that. We can always give some prasadam. Well, it's said when someone comes to your home, the three things you can do is offer them some sweet words, offer them a place to sit, and offer them some water. It doesn't matter how poor you are, you can do those three things. So I would say give them prasadam, or if not, give some nice words at least, and make a connection a little bit. And in that way, gradually, people build a connection with the devotees, and then maybe things can improve for them. So yeah, we just have to find a way to practically help them. And prasadam is the best, I guess. Yes.
We see the main issues, especially at younger age, is that financial problems if they leave the house, or relationship breakdown where they are so distressed. So physical level we can give food, but when they are so distressed with the relationship breakdowns, how can we help them?
So you're saying people when they go through
emotional crisis.
Emotional, yeah. Well, it's a big thing in the world today. Like obviously the World Health Organization is saying that mental illness and psychological problems within the individual are the highest, the most prominent type of problem which is growing in the world today. I think even in Krishna consciousness, we know that spirituality, Krishna consciousness, the holy name can solve everything. But the reality is that for many people, some level of help, whether it be therapy or whether it be some kind of, having some coaching or some kind of psychological advice or help on that level can be useful for many people. So even in, like, for example, even in Mana now, we have a group of devotees that give help on that level. Because many people, you just need to speak to someone. And it's not necessarily someone that's giving you lots of spiritual advice, but just the ability to have someone who you can speak to reveal all of your emotions. That can actually help greatly. So even though we understand Krishna consciousness is the ultimate solution, we're not blind to giving people help on physical and psychological level. That can sometimes be very, very good, very necessary, but not by itself, along with the spiritual. Yeah, yeah.
Their own difficulties as they start trying to take on more responsibilities from being a teenager to a young adult, and when they come then to seek spirituality, they come with their own, stories and kind of events and experiences which can be very difficult, like burdens for them.
Yeah.
And so I was going to ask how we deal with that, but you already gave the answer before I asked. So.
Yeah, even something like depression, is very like taboo thing. We think like, oh, we section off a certain group of people and say, oh, they have depression. But it's interesting, even if you look in the Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada writes in one of the translations that Arjun put his bow aside depressed. Now that's interesting. It's even saying that Arjun had some level of depression. So it's very natural in the world that we're living in today that many of us may go through periods in our life where we feel sometimes a little low, a little hopeless, sometimes a little feeling like we're in a dark tunnel and we don't know when it's going to come to an end. And therefore, we often need these kind of help as well, ability to talk to people. Yeah, like that. So yes, this is not a good excuse. I prefer to practically help the world. Now, in the 6th chapter, Krishna goes on to speak about a subject which many of us are familiar with because we live with it every single day, and that is the mind. And sometimes people say, I can't practice spiritual life because I'm too active. Sitting down for 2 hours and meditating, sitting in a class for 1 hour and just listening, by myself in my room every day, opening a book and reading it. I can't do these things. My mind is too active. I'm too energetic. I've got too many thoughts whizzing through upstairs, and spirituality is not for me. But Krishna says practically this is everyone in the world. Everyone's mind is everywhere. What does Krishna say to Arjun? Chanchalam himana Krishna pramati balavadridam. Krishna says the mind is very, very unsteady, very stubborn, very strong, obstinate. And the mind is always coming up with so many things to distract you. Actually, in the Niti Shastra, the nature of the mind is described. Markatasya surapanam tatra vrishchika damsanam Tanmadhye bhuta samcharo yadva tadva bhavishyati. This is how Niti Shastra explains the mind. Markatasya. Ever seen a monkey? Very active, no? Now, Markatasya Surapanam. Have you ever seen an intoxicated monkey? Tatra Vrishchika Damsanam. Have you ever seen a monkey that's completely intoxicated that's then been bitten by a scorpion? Tanmadhye Bhuta Samcharo. Have you ever seen a monkey completely intoxicated, bitten by a scorpion, and then haunted by a ghost? Yadva tadva bhavishyati. Who can understand what such a monkey will do next? This is the mind. The Niti Shastra says it's so unpredictable, it's so difficult to control, as difficult to control as the wind, Arjun says. So if someone says, I can't practice spiritual life because my mind is too active, that is the completely wrong logic. It's like saying, if someone says, when my mind calms down, then I'll practice spirituality. It's completely the wrong logic. It's like saying, once I satisfy my hunger, then I'll go to the restaurant. Or once I feel better, then I'll go to the hospital. Or once I have all the knowledge I require, then I'll go to the library to get the books out. No, you go to those places to achieve that end. And therefore, if someone says that I can't do it because I'm too active, they're the ones that really need it, because the mind needs to be controlled. You see, the mind is like an internet browser, isn't it? Like you have Mozilla Firefox or Google Chrome. Shishikodanadai Mayaposashi ki. Every browser has a default homepage, isn't it? So your mind has a homepage with the starting point of everything. Every browser has a history, isn't it, of all the sites you visited. So your mind has a history of all the things you've interacted with. Every browser has its favorites, isn't it? So your mind also has favorites, things it goes back to. Every browser has an autocomplete, isn't it? So like when you do www.s, all these options come up. So similarly, the mind also has all of these preset things within it. But can you reconfigure your browser on your computer? You can. You can delete the history. You can change the favorites. You can reset the home page. You can add plugins in, take them out. So you can reconfigure your browser. So the mind is like that. It needs to be reconfigured. So some people think I am a passionate person, or I am just an agitated person. No, you're a person who has an agitated mind. And the mind can be changed. The mind can be remolded. The mind can be rewired, but it requires a process. Therefore, Krishna gives that process. I mentioned that yesterday. Ashamshayam mahabaho mano durni graham chalam abhyasena tu konteya vairagyena chakriyate. Krishna says, by practice and by detachment, you can actually remold the mind. So again, this is not a good excuse. No, everyone needs to spend that time connecting and controlling the mind to the higher spiritual energy. Any questions on this? The mind and Ramananda Prabhu.
Just in regards to the last point that you made about reconfiguring the mind. So we do see in the Bhagavad Gita that one of the important points that Krishna was stressing to Arjuna is that you do have your nature. Your nature is to fight. You are a Kshatriya by nature. You can't not be, you can't sort of run away from that. So would it be true to say that while it is possible to reconfigure the mind, we also do have certain each one of us has our own individual default nature, which we can only configure the mind to a certain extent, but we also do have maybe a certain, some of us are going to be more passionate than others,
Yeah.
some of us are going to be more active than others. I just wonder if you could comment on that a little.
Yeah, for sure. By purifying the mind, by controlling the mind, you end up becoming the best version of yourself. Right? You don't change yourself necessarily. You don't start being a different person. But what you do is you do become the best version of yourself. So yeah, some people are more charismatic. Some people are more subdued. Some people are more bold. Some people are more reserved. These are character traits which are not just going to change when we come to Krishna consciousness. But what we learn to do is how to use these traits in such a way that they don't become destructive, they don't degrade us, they don't denigrate us, they don't hold us back from achieving spiritual perfection. So when we talk about controlling the mind and rewiring our consciousness, you're right. We still have a nature, and that won't immediately disappear. But to some extent, we use it in such a way that it becomes progressive, like that. So, so Krishna says to Arjuna, "What will repression accomplish?" There's no point going to the forest because you need to engage your nature. So yeah, thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah.
Again, regarding the mind. So as we know, I mean, as many of the people are working in IT and other field as well. So most of the time we work on multitasking, like opening many windows and like that. So it again come to the spiritual life as well. So basically while chanting and some doing other services, so mind tries to do multitasking. So how to avoid that?
Well, the first thing is the mind may have a tendency to multitask, but at least our physical senses and our physical body should not cooperate with that. Right? So the mind may want to check the phone while you're chanting, but as long as you don't touch the phone, as long as your body doesn't move in that way. So the first thing we can do to avoid this tendency of multitasking and splitting our attention is that at least we be disciplined in how we act. You say? It's easier to act yourself into a new way of thinking than to think yourself into a new way of acting. Yeah. It's easier to act yourself into a new way of thinking than think yourself into a new way of acting. It doesn't all this saying that there could be another perspective to it, but it holds true in this sense that it's easier if you focus on your gross activities. If you focus on your gross activities and you're disciplined in that, then generally your mind will follow that. So who is that person who can say, okay, I'm going to sit down and just chant, or I'm going to, imagine if we made a vow, like one Kartik, I was thinking like, I don't have any more time to do anything else. Like my day is already packed, but Kartik is coming and everyone makes a vow. So like, what am I going to do? I don't have any more time. I can't fit any more in. So then what I did that Kartik is I made a vow that I'm not going to chant, not necessarily that I'm going to chant more rounds, but I made a vow that I'm going to chant 16 rounds in one go, sitting down and doing nothing else. So that was interesting because it wasn't a quantitatively extra vow, but it was a qualitative vow. And it was very powerful. So you can also discipline yourself like that to quieten the mind. And then you get more power over your mind.
rather than directly going to mind.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Quite often our day can be, on autopilot because we have a busy schedule. So, do you have any suggestions for how to avoid autopilot all the time?
That's why in the first chapter when we discussed, I was talking about taking some time to have air in your life, isn't it? I was talking about air in your, because you need to have space to think. So I often share this with devotees that one of the most powerful things I think I did in my life was journaling. Just writing about what happened, what's happening in life, how I'm feeling, what I observed in myself, what I observed in others, what change I see occurring in myself, what good qualities I have, what bad qualities I have, what my hopes and fears of the future are. And journaling is very powerful because it helps you to observe your inner world. And when you observe your inner world, then you're much less likely to become mechanical. So doing things like journaling or having meaningful conversations with devotees where you reveal your heart, Guya Makyati Prachiti, Rupa Goswami says, this helps you to avoid becoming mechanical. So there are different things we can do like that. Another thing we can do to avoid becoming mechanical is just take a time, regular time away from the regular routine of Krishna consciousness and do something different. So many devotees once a month, they just go away and chant many more rounds. Or devotees once in a year go on a retreat for a week or 2 weeks and just do something in an absorbed way. And that helps to give extra depth to your general day-to-day practices like that. So you can also do that. So there can be different things. Okay, so I'll do one more and then we'll have some questions and answers and then we'll kind of conclude for this morning. Chapter number 7, Krishna also answers something which many people give as an excuse as to why they don't want to practice spiritual life. Chapter number 7 is very interesting. It's entitled Knowledge of the Absolute. And in this chapter, Krishna begins to explain about how one can know him in full. One can actually perceive his presence everywhere. And right in the beginning of chapter number 7, Krishna says something beautiful to Arjun. He says, Maya Shakta Mana Partha Yogam Yunjan Madashraya Ashamshayam Samagramam Yatha Gyasasi Tachrunu. He says, now just here, by practicing yoga in full consciousness of me, Krishna says, you can know me full, free from doubt. So what Krishna basically explains is that God is not just a belief. Krishna is not just a belief. Krishna consciousness is not just about training you to believe in God. Krishna consciousness is a process by which is meant to equip you and empower you to perceive the presence of God at every step in your life. And so if someone says, I only believe in science, I only believe in fact, I only believe in that which I can see and perceive, I don't believe in faith, I don't believe in belief, I don't believe in spirituality or non-tangible things, therefore I'm not going to practice it, that's not a good argument. Because actually, Srila Prabhupada, he presented the Bhagavad Gita not so much as a religion, but actually as a spiritual science. First, you hear this spiritual science, you hear this spiritual knowledge, and then you observe, you look at the world around you, and you'll begin to see how everything that Krishna is talking about is actually playing out in the world around you. Once you observe that this knowledge is real, is actually going on around me, then you want to live it. Then you have a desire to apply it. And when you apply this knowledge, then you get an experience of Krishna in your life, and then your desire to share it with others. So this is how you can see Krishna consciousness is full of, there's no holes in Krishna consciousness. H stands for hear. First you hear the knowledge. O stands for observe, because after you hear it, you observe it and see if it's true. L stands for live it. Once you've observed it and seen it works in other people and it's working in the world, you live it. And then when you live it, E, you'll experience it. And then once you've experienced it, S, you'll want to share it. And when you share it, then you'll get even deeper realization of Krishna consciousness. And when you do this, then you realize it's not just empty, it's not just a faith, but it's something you can actually perceive in your life. People think science is fact, spirituality is faith, but you don't need any more faith to believe in Krishna consciousness or to start practicing Krishna consciousness than you need to believe anything in the material world. It requires just as much faith. It requires just as much faith to believe in the Big Bang as it does in the Bhagavatam's account of creation. In science, they also have faith. It's not that science doesn't have faith. But you know what they call faith in science? An axiomatic truth. You know, in science, they say we don't have faith. We just have axiomatic truths. And what's an axiomatic truth? Aristotle talks about this. He says, an axiomatic truth is something that a scientist will accept in the beginning, even though they can't prove it. They'll accept it as a truth axiomatically, just so that they can begin their research, and then later on they'll come back and they'll verify that. So then we say, okay, we also have axiomatic truths that we follow. Yes, Krishna is God. It's an axiomatic truth. No, it's faith. No, it's not. It's an axiomatic truth. Right? The soul. No, that's faith. No, it's an axiomatic truth. Because if you begin from there and you practice the process of Krishna consciousness, then what does Krishna say in the 9th chapter? Pratyaksha avagamam dharmyam. You can know the self by direct perception. So we should not feel Krishna consciousness to be unscientific. We should not think that Krishna consciousness is just a belief or a faith. It's as scientific as anything in the world. And so if someone says, I don't believe in these things because they're faith-based, no, that's not a good excuse. Anyone have any questions about science and Krishna consciousness, or faith and doubt, or how Krishna consciousness is scientific, can be proved? Yeah.
Thank you, Maharaj. It's more just a general sort of question about the principle of science, because Srila Prabhupada, he did say things which subjectively appear to be condemning science as a principle. But just recently I was reading that when we go back hundreds of years to when, the old scientists, and the principle behind it at that time, because it was a God-based, religion-based culture that existed, that a lot of the motivation of scientists hundreds of years ago was to see, well, how does God's creation work? It wasn't about disproving God. It was just about, well, what is happening in the background of God's creation? How can we understand more about God's creation? So I just wonder if you could say a little something about having a balanced perspective, because sometimes we hear Srila Prabhupada say things and we can become a little fanatic. All science is terrible. All scientists are terrible. But is that actually the fact? And could you just say a little something about that?
It's a good point. Yeah. I guess there are two things. There is science and there is scientism. And science is often about understanding how the world works and helping us to live in the world in a more progressive and comfortable way. And to be honest, we're happy for that science because it helps us to get things done. It helps us to live in this world. But scientism is a type of science which is aggressively trying to take God out of the equation. It's going beyond the realms of what it can actually prove and professing to prove more than it can. And that's the kind of science that Prabhupada was speaking out against. When, yes, you may be able to create an airplane or create a car or whatever, but that doesn't mean you can explain why the earth is, balancing in that way in space, So Srila Prabhupada, he was kind of speaking out at that kind of science. And you're right, many scientists, they were God conscious. I think it's Louis Pasteur, he says, all I'm doing by all my scientific research is finding out how God did his work. Another scientist, he said, spirituality and science are opposed in the sense that the thumb and the forefinger are opposed. That opposition allows me to grasp things. So he was saying that they actually go hand in hand in that way. And so, Srila Prabhupada, he also founded a scientific wing, Bhaktivedanta Institute, and he wanted to explain Krishna consciousness in a scientific way. So Srila Prabhupada wasn't against science per se, but he was against the type of science that professes to know more than it actually knows and tries to take God out of the picture. Yeah.
Take it as a means of establishing that religion or faith-based systems, in their eyes, are much weaker, and they often use some kind of argument along the lines of, the bigger the claim or the statement, the bigger the evidence should be. So if one is claiming that there is God or something like that, they should have larger evidence for it. So how do we present Krishna consciousness in a way which reveals that, rather than going, because of course going and attacking will not allow anyone to connect to Krishna consciousness. How do we present Krishna consciousness in a way which reveals itself scientifically to others?
Yeah, so any claim which is a big claim should then have a big evidence, a higher degree of evidence. You see, the main thing we're saying in Krishna consciousness is we're saying there is an experiment, there is proof, but you have to use the right tools for the experiment. You see, like say for example, if I say, here's a thermometer, that's a scientific instrument. Now I want you to prove to me that this thing weighs 30 kilograms using this instrument. It's a scientific instrument after all. So you should be able to prove it to me. You'll say it is a scientific instrument, but it's the wrong instrument. In other words, if you want to prove something, you have to use the right instrument. So if you want to prove something spiritual, you can't use material instruments. It's as silly as saying, prove that if you can't prove to me this weighs 30 kilograms using a thermometer, clearly you don't have good evidence. No, that's because it's the wrong instrument. So what we're basically saying is that we can give you big evidence, but there is a higher dimensional experiment that you have to undertake. And if you undertake that higher dimensional experiment, then the big evidence you'll get is your own realization. What can be bigger than that? But if you say, no, I want the proof before the experiment, that's also a silly argument. Because in what sphere of science do they give you the proof before the experiment? So the point is, number one, there is big evidence. Number two, that big evidence can be uncovered by a higher dimensional experiment. And number three, you can't ask for the proof before the experiment because that's just not scientific. And so these are the kind of some of the things we say. The other thing is, when someone makes a point like that, we can always throw it back in their court and ask them, well, how much evidence do you have for what you're professing? Not only do they not have significant evidence, they've posited evidence before which has proved to be completely wrong. Yet we're now supposed to trust you again? Therefore, this world is the cheaters and the cheated. Like one person, he wrote a book on all of the theories of life and it became a bestseller. And then later on, he wrote a sequel to his book explaining how everything in the first book was wrong. And the second book also became a bestseller. And you kind of think like, cheaters and the cheated. So people, they want so much evidence for Krishna consciousness, but when it comes to material phenomena, they're ready to just accept it. Like you walk into the science museum. Once we had a brahmachari trip to the science museum. You can imagine what devotees were like, just like. And there's like a little plaque, and they've invested like hundreds and thousands of pounds into this like complicated thing. And then there's a plaque, and then it says like, and 9.2 billion years ago, the temperature changed by 0.00027%. And therefore this happened. And everyone's just like, yeah, obviously that's true. Because they've spent all this money and, like people just accept it. This is called framing bias. There's certain biases in the world by which we accept things, even though they may be untrue. One bias is called framing bias. According to how someone presents something, you're more inclined to believe it. Like if someone does a nice PowerPoint presentation, you're more inclined to believe it because it looks more organized, right? So this is called framing bias. Another type of bias is called consensus bias. We're more likely to believe things because many other people around us believe it. Another type of bias is called anchoring bias. You're more likely to believe the first thing that you hear. The first thing that you hear becomes very much entrenched in your consciousness, and you naturally have a bias towards it. Another type of bias is called self-serving bias. We're more likely to believe those things which serve our selfish purposes. So if something kind of is convenient for sense gratification, kind of like, yeah, that sounds about right. That's good. That's a good point. So there's all these biases in the world. And so sometimes people put a level of scrutiny towards Krishna consciousness that they don't put towards so many other things they believe in. And that was what Srila Prabhupada was speaking out against. Yeah.
I'm still quite confused on the term science itself, because we have like material science, like biology, physics, and stuff like that. And then there's spiritual science as well, like KC. So I can't like grasp the idea of like what science is and like how it can be spiritual as well. So
yeah, of course, science has many, many different definitions, but perhaps the baseline definition of science is hypothesis, experiment, conclusion. So wherever there is hypothesis, experiment, conclusion, we can say that is science. So therefore, in Krishna consciousness, do we have a hypothesis? Yeah, what's the hypothesis? That we're a soul, that we come from a supreme soul, and that by various practices, we can reestablish a connection with the supreme soul. And then, is there an experiment? Yes, there are a set of practices that you can do, a lifestyle that you can lead. And then, is there an observation? Yes, the scripture says, if you, Arjuna asked so many times to Krishna, what are the symptoms of a self-realized soul? How does he walk? How does he talk? How does he interact with the world? So then Krishna begins to explain, this is what should happen to you if you actually become a self-realized soul. So then you can have an observation and see whether such things are coming about. It's not just a faith, it's a science, because you can actually perceive how Krishna consciousness is working and how Krishna consciousness is changing your perception. That makes sense? Yeah. Yeah, so like this, there are many, I just covered 7. I think tomorrow we're going to have Bhagavatam class, so we won't carry on with this. But this was just to give you a taste. I'll just in 5 minutes go through all the other excuses that people ask and or people offer, and how Krishna is so expert that Krishna takes away each one of them. Here's another excuse. I'll do it in the future. So what does Krishna do in the 8th chapter? He explains how death is also just around the corner. Someone may say, yeah, Krishna consciousness, just now coming. Krishna says, death is also just now coming. Therefore, if you say, I'll do it in the future, that's not a very good argument, because we don't know how much time we have left. Someone may say, I don't follow organized religion, I follow my heart. So Krishna in the 9th chapter says, yes, Krishna consciousness, spirituality is all about the heart. Krishna says, just offer me with love and devotion, a leaf, flower, and fruit. I want the love and devotion. But what does Krishna say in the very next verse after that? Whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you offer or give away, do it as an offering to me. So in order to release that heartfelt spirituality, you need to undergo a process. Just like if you want to reveal your heart through music, first you have to learn notes. If you want to reveal your heart through writing, first you have to learn grammar. So if you want to reveal your heart and express the heart in spirituality, there is a sadhana, a practice to do that. So Krishna says that's not a very good argument. Someone may say, I don't want to practice Krishna consciousness because I don't have the experience of God. I've never seen him. So in the 10th chapter, Krishna says, you can see me everywhere. We don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. So if someone says, I don't see God, that doesn't mean God can't be seen. It just means you haven't trained yourself to be able to see God. And therefore, Krishna explains in the 10th chapter how you can begin to see him everywhere. Someone may say, I can't take up practical spiritual life because I have too many obstacles and problems in my life. So what does Krishna tell Arjuna in the 11th chapter? Krishna says, you're faced on this battlefield, but know, Arjuna, that everyone has already been killed. I've already annihilated all of your enemies. All you have to do is become an instrument in my hands. So we think we have so many problems, but what Krishna is saying is that I've already solved all your problems. I already have the long-term vision. All you have to do is become part of my plan. Someone may say, I can't practice Krishna consciousness because I'll lose all of my friends. But what Krishna explains in the 12th chapter is the amazing character that a devotee develops when they take up spiritual life. And when you develop this kind of spiritual character, you'll actually be able to attract the best friends. And not just that, you'll make friendship with the ultimate friend, which is Krishna. And so Krishna says in the 12th chapter that my devotee is very, very dear to me. I become his best friend. So we don't need to worry about losing friends. we'll actually get the best friends. Someone may say, I'm already happy. I don't need to practice spiritual life. So what Krishna explains in the 13th chapter is there are different qualities of happiness. So if you want to experience a higher grade of happiness, that's spiritual happiness. So yeah, you may say you're happy, but that may be the highest degree of happiness of the low grade. Go for a higher grade. Someone may say, I can't practice spiritual life because I have too many bad habits. So in the 14th chapter, Krishna talks about the modes of material nature. And he explains how you can actually elevate yourself. You can change your habits. You can change your nature, your lower nature. You can elevate it by having this knowledge of the modes of nature. Someone may say, I don't want to practice spiritual life because I'll lose my ambition, I'll lose my hunger for success. So in the 15th chapter, Krishna explains this world is just a reflection. So if you really want to be ambitious, if you really want to find success, then don't look in the shadow. Don't look in the reflection. Actually turn yourself towards the reality. What's the point of being a success in a mirage? Rather be a success in the real world. And in that way, Krishna says that the spiritualist is the most ambitious. The spiritualist is the most successful because they have ambitions and success which are rooted in the real world. Someone may say, no, I don't want to practice religion because religion causes more problems. But Krishna explains actually that atheism causes the most problems, because he explains that the demoniac who take God out of the picture, they engage in unbeneficial, harmful acts which will destroy the world, because they can't see the spirit in everything around them. Therefore, far from religion causing more problems, real religion, true spirituality is the solution to all problems. Someone may say, I've seen too much hypocrisy in religion, therefore I don't want to practice religion. So in the 17th chapter, Krishna talks about degrees of faith. And Krishna is saying, you shouldn't have a utopian vision. It's not that all people of faith are necessarily having the highest and purest type of faith. But there are people who have a high, pure type of faith. And instead of looking at religious people who are hypocritical, why don't you try and look at religious people who have a higher degree of pure faith, who are actually following? And finally, someone may say, I don't want to be forced. I have to do spiritual life naturally. And Krishna agrees. Krishna at the end of the Gita says to Arjuna, I've given you all the knowledge. Now do what you want to do. I don't force you. So there is no force in religion. And there's nothing impelling you to do it. It's completely natural. So yeah, Bhagavad Gita is not a book of force. Krishna is not forcing you. So in this way, if you look systematically, Krishna basically answers all of our excuses. And then we begin to look at our life and say, why not? I can do it. Because there's nothing holding me back. Remember the story I gave you at the end yesterday? If our heart has reached the goal, if in our heart we really want to do it, then there can be no external obstacle or impediment to advancing in spiritual life or advancing in Krishna consciousness. And this is what Krishna systematically establishes in the Bhagavad Gita. Hare Krishna. So thank you so much. Thank you very much. Okay, so we won't take any more questions because we're all over time already. So thank you very much. And I'll hand over for any announcements. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki. Hare Krishna.